Hello and welcome to the Budget Committee meeting for March 7th, 2022. Tonight we're going to be engaging in some Budget 101 and learning more about the budget process here in the Beaverton School District from our Associate Superintendent, Mike Schofield. A big thank you to everybody, both familiar faces on the Budget Committee and new folks. It is so appreciated, the work that you are doing here to help support our district. And I just want to note that all of our Budget Committee members are doing this for free, and they are doing this to support our students. We have a very large budget here in Beaverton and a lot of different schools and needs, and making our way through this budget and understanding it better is quite a large task. So thank you for being willing to do that with us. In place of a formal roll call, what we're going to do tonight is we'll start by zone and have everybody introduce themselves, how long, and let us know how long you've served in your current role, whether you're a school board member or a budget committee member. We'll start with zone 1 with the school board member in zone 1, and then we will move to the budget committee member in zone 1 and kind of go in that order. So I'm looking for Susan. Are you on the call, Susan? Okay, maybe we'll move to start Jason Homebaum, are you there?
Yep.
You want to lead off?
Sure. Jason Homebaum, Budget Committee Zone 1. This is my second year doing this, and I'm looking forward from all the things I learned last year. So, yeah.
And then Zone 2, our school board member in Zone 2.
Hola, buenas noches. I'm Karen Perez, Zone 2. It's my first year on the school board, and I will hand it off. Oops. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh. Go ahead.
Hi, this is Farah Mahmoud, and I'm a committee member in Zone 2. This is my second year. So hopefully last year everything was not like it was, all complicated. So hopefully this year we get a bit easier.
And then Zone 3. Let's see, I don't see our school board member from Zone 3. So if we have our budget committee member from Zone 3, Diane, if you want to introduce yourself.
Sure, Diane McCartney, and this is my first year on the Budget Committee.
And then moving on to Zone 4, our school board member.
Hi, I'm Sunita Garg, and this is my first year on the school board. And I'm excited to hear from everyone. And I will hand off to Alok Mehrotra, who is the Budget Committee member for Zone 4.
Hello, everybody. This is Alok Mehrotra. This is my first year joining in to assist. We've actually just moved to the Beaverton area, or the Portland area, about 2 years ago. So glad to have this opportunity to help out with the community, and looking forward to working with all of you guys.
Our Zone 5 school board member.
Hi, good evening. My name is Ugonna, and I've been on the school board less than 1 year, and I'm excited to hear from everyone and learn a bit more about the budget process. Thank you. I don't see Krista. Yeah, there she is. I hand over to Krista.
I'm Krista Billings. This is my first year on the Budget Committee, although I might be a familiar face for some of you. I serve on the Arco-Uti School Board as well.
And then moving on to Zone 6.
Good evening. My name is Becky Timchuk, and I'm the vice chair of the school board, and I've been on the school board 7 years. And right alongside of me is my very able-bodied budget member.
Hi, I'm Heidi Edwards, she, her pronouns, Zone 6 Budget Committee member. This is my 7th year on the Budget Committee.
Great. And I am Tom Collette. I'm Zone 7 in the current school board chair. I've been on the school board for close to 5 years now, I guess. And I'm excited to be here tonight, and I will pass it off to Lisa Schultz, my new but very familiar with the Beaverton School District school board member.
Everybody, I'm Lisa Schultz. I served on the board and budget committee from 2007 to 2011, and I'm again serving this year on the budget committee. So thank you very much.
Great. And thanks, everybody. With that, I am going to hand it over to Deputy Superintendent Schofield to help us with our presentation tonight.
Thank you, Chair Collette. I appreciate the opportunity. This is my third budget go around here in Beaverton, and number 33 overall, I think, if I'm counting right. So that's a lot of school district budgeting. Looking forward to sharing some time with you again today. I'm going to share my screen here. We're going to go through this presentation on Budget 101. Can you folks see it? Excellent. Okay, so we're going to do Budget 101 tonight. It'll be a lot of talking just to get you familiarized with the overall budget process. This is not an official budget committee meeting, but more of an informal where things are, how things are looking, and what you can expect to see when we get together in May. So with that, I'll get started. Again, we've done the welcome and opening remarks, and we'll start with our presentation agenda. So for background purposes, we're going to talk about the components of the budget, the sources of funds and how we use them. We're going to talk about where the money comes from, how we spend it, how we compare to some of our neighbors, although that's getting a little more difficult to do these days. We're going to give you an update on funding. We're in the middle of a biennium, so we're at a pretty good place to have better information than we had last year at this time in terms of funding. We'll give you an enrollment update on how things are looking from an enrollment standpoint. So that's kind of the background data we'll give you. Then on the general fund, we'll go back to the numbers we shared with you last spring in terms of where we thought we would be on spending and revenue. And it's our own little kind of scorecard of how we did compared to last spring when we last chatted. We'll go over the numbers currently, taking kind of a 3-year look ahead this year and the next 2 years to see where we see things headed, both from a funding and spending perspective. We'll also go over the student investment account, which is a new source of funding for the school district that started in 2019, 2020. We'll talk about federal coronavirus relief funds. Farah, you mentioned all the craziness of last year. We've still got a little of it. We're getting a little closer to what I would call normal in terms of a funding and regular cycles, but still a lot of interesting sources of funding out there and student needs for sure. We'll go over budget listing and learning survey results. Jessica will do that when we get to her section. She'll do a budget document overview. Then we'll talk timeline. And then after that, we'll talk question and comments. And for those of you that are new to the budget committee, know that we want to share this information with you tonight. If you need further information or would like some additional time with Jessica or myself or both of us, let's get that scheduled between now and May after the end of this meeting. But we wanted to give you the background and overview and give you a chance to chat more later if we need to. So let's get started. The components of the budget. This is our 21-22 budget. You'll see the big blue part of the pie is our general fund. It's still the largest part of our budget. Next, right, but not too far behind it, is the grant fund at 180 million. Grant fund is where the SIA and those ESSER funds are, and the grant fund has grown pretty significantly over the last couple of years. Next to that, we have the capital projects fund, and then you can kind of go down the list and see all the various funding sources. General fund revenue. This is just a general reminder that the state school fund dominates the general fund in terms of resources. About 90% of our funding in the general fund comes through the state school fund. Property taxes are a part of the state school fund, so we don't count them separately here, but we do count the local option levy separately for Beaverton. We are a fortunate community in that the Beaverton community has supported a local option levy for teachers. And so you see that in there in the green at 7.2%, and then all of our other sources at the 2.8%. General fund expenditures for actuals. This is how we spent our money last year in 2020, 2021. I think the key takeaway from this slide is you could see just under 90% of our funds are spent on salary and benefits. So we are a people intensive business, and that's where we spend about 90 cents of every dollar. If you look at the other things like contracted services, transfers that we make to other funds to fund insurance reserves and those kinds of things, charter school payments, transportation and utilities, You take all of those into account along with the salary and benefits, and you see we have about 19.3 million left, or about 4.2% of our budget. So when people talk about all the things that need to be funded through our general fund, all those things are at that 4.2%. Not a lot of extra funds laying around, a lot more dedicated to salary and benefits and the must-haves for the Beaverton School District. How we compare, so we brought this to you last year too, and we'll do it again. We compare ourselves to districts that are similar in size, like Portland and Salem, and then kind of similar in terms of where they're located for Hillsborough, Tigard, and West Linn. And we have a note on West Linn. They did not have, we couldn't get their finance data in time for this analysis, so they won't be a part of the comparison, at least this go around. But in terms of how we compare, here's how we spent general fund resources in 2020, 2021. You see Beaverton on the left with the red bar around it. We spent $11,744 per student. That compares to Portland and Salem Kaiser, Hillsborough, and Tigard Tualatin. The section in green is what we spent on instruction per student, and the section in blue is the amount spent on support services. I will tell you that in discussions with my colleagues last week when we got together, several of us districts it's getting more and more difficult to compare directly because of how districts are using their SIA and ESSER funds and the fact that those are outside the general operating budget. So I don't know how good this comparison is, and that's a challenge for me and some of my colleagues to take a look at how we can make sure that we can get good comparison data as we share it with you. But this is what we have for this year. And again, if we look at the next slide, you can see how we compare on reserves. That's always something, a discussion point within school districts to say, are you carrying too much or too little reserves? You can see Beaverton with the red box around it. We're at 17.3% of revenue. Portland's a little less in terms of a percentage. Salem Kaiser's a little more. Hillsborough down a little, and then Tigard Tualatin back up a little. So you can see we're kind of in the middle when we look at our friends and neighbors in terms of reserves that we're carried at the end of the 2020-2021 school year. Funding and economic update. So what we know in a start of a biennium year, this is a little more dicey, but this year we feel pretty good because we know our state school fund is at $9.3 billion. We're in the middle, we'll be in the middle of the biennium, and we'll be budgeting for the second year of the biennium. We've collected our budget priorities from staff and community. We did the budget listing and learning session back in January and collected feedback. We just closed that off the end of last week. Budget priorities collected, additional summer school dollars. We know those are coming from the legislature. There's $150 million allocated for summer program. I think $100 million or so will come to school districts, and we have not yet seen Beaverton's share of that, but we're looking forward to seeing that fairly soon. ESSER total projects projected remaining at June 30. We think we'll have about $43 million left of ESSER, which is the one-time federal resources. And the SIA, we project the award at 22-23 for $32.1 million. And we'll show you a little bit more on that in a moment. What are we working on? We're working on revisions to the ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 spending plans. We put a plan together last fall, shared it with the board, got that plan into action, and then we really ran into some staffing shortages and issues in terms of being able to fill positions, and you'll see a little bit of that coming up. But we've got some more funds to spend, and we'll be working on those plans over the next month or so. We also need to finalize enrollment. That's coming really soon. Our enrollment projection for next year. We will, from year to year, we have modest adjustments in the general fund up or down, small adjustments that we make on an annual basis. And again, we're working on staff shortages and how to alleviate some of the pain we've experienced this year. And in terms of what we need to know, we're still bargaining with our licensed staff for the current year. We started bargaining, I guess, about a year ago in April. And we're currently bargaining with classified staff for their contract is up this June, and we've started bargaining with them. We started on Friday. From a state perspective, what's going on with taxes? This just shows you the corporate excise tax and what's gone on over the past 30 years or so, and how much they've gone up over the last few years in particular. Part of that's the SIA, the corporate activities tax. So you can see that going up pretty significantly most recently. You can also see Oregon's general fund reserves and how those have gone up, or excuse me, revenues, and how those have gone up from year to year. Slight decline in 07, 09. We all remember the pain of that year, and then declining since that point. And this was taken from the Oregon Office of Economic Analysis off their last forecast, which was back in February. In terms of Oregon's reserves, never seen them more healthy than the end of the 1921 biennium. The red line there is the percent of general fund. So they had over 20% of their general fund in reserves at the end of the 1921 biennium. So again, haven't seen it like that in years. And you can see looking across this graph all the way back to 9901, 5% was about as high as you would see back in those days. Climbed steadily with the institution of the Rainy Day Fund and the Education Stability Fund. And then on top of that, just the massive revisions we've seen in the general fund balance that surprised a lot of economists, or at least our economists, early on in the pandemic, and have continued to be very strong since then. Enrollment changes. So I think the key takeaway here is to look back to 1920. You can see we're just over 39,000 students in the 1920 year. What we are currently projecting, again, subject to a little bit of revision, is about 2,000 fewer students for 22-23. Again, we're finalizing that, but you can see our enrollments declined by a couple thousand students in the last 3 years. And in terms of dollars today, each student's, ADM is worth about $9,000 per student. So you're talking about $18 million in lost enrollment. State school fund, again, just a reminder of where we were with state school fund. I think when we last got together, I don't think the legislature had decided on 9.3. They were estimating 9.1 at the time. We used 9.3 for budgeting, and that's the number that the legislature ended up at, was the 9.3. Key takeaway on this slide is looking back to previous biennium. You can see increases of 8.8%, 13.3%, 9.8%. The increase from the last biennium to the current biennium is a 3.3%. And that's a 3.3% increase over 2 years. That's something we need to keep an eye on as a school district over the long term, because a 3.3% increase in a biennium is not sustainable to our operating budget. But by the time we give step column increases to staff, it just doesn't keep up with our costs over that time period. Okay, the general fund. Here's this 2021 spring projection we gave you. For those of you that are new to the budget committee, you'll see a lot of financial numbers put up this way. When we talk about resources, we talk about our beginning fund balance on the left, what is state controlled, what we consider locally controlled. Again, that local controlled number is our local option levy, as well as some few dollars here and there for the district. State controlled is the state school fund plus property taxes associated with the state school fund. And so you can see back in the spring of 2021, we estimated we'd have about $548 million in overall resources. On the expenditure side, we kind of break it up into salaries and then associated payroll costs and benefits, and then everything else. You can see we thought we'd spend about $470 million in the spring of 2020, 2021. How did we finally end up? Well, on the resource side, we ended up a little bit at $552 million, a variance of a little over 0.5%. If you look at the expenditure side, you can see we spent a little bit less than the projection, just under 1% in terms of spending less than we thought we would. And so overall, our ending fund balance went from about 78 million to 85 million. So close. You can see our all other was the biggest variance on here of a -5%. We just did not spend as much as we thought we would at the end of 2020, 2021. Otherwise, I'd say we're pretty close on the numbers there in terms of what we projected in April and how we actually ended the year. So we feel pretty good about that. In terms of the numbers moving forward, and if you're not a numbers person, you don't have to spend too much time on this, but I know some people like to see it both ways. So here we look at the numbers and we see same thing, that beginning fund balance, the state controlled amount, the locally controlled amount, and all across the left, same thing, expenditures, salary, benefits, all other. And then the years, we have 2019, 2020, 2021. We have the adopted budget for the current year, 2021, 2022. And then we have what we're currently projecting in terms of where we think numbers are headed this year. And then we have a projected amount for next year's budget, and then a projected amount for 2023, 2024, which is the start of a new biennium, but we like to at least take it out a couple of years so you can see where we're headed. What's going on in terms of the overall effect here as we look across, we just look at the bottom line and we say, where are we in terms of reserves? This bottom in white, you see the planning and Purge reserve. This was established by the board in the current budget. So you see it goes from 3.8 million up to 13.4 million. In terms of adopted, we currently have it projected at 9.3 million. So that's a Purge reserve that was put in place in the current year, and that will grow somewhere in the neighborhood. You see the 9 to the 15 to the 21 million. That will grow over time along with our payroll costs. And it's meant to be put away as a Purge reserve. So as Purge rates increase in future years, the district will have a reserve in place to help cushion the blow of those large rate increases. So overall, just looking at the bottom line, you see beginning fund balance, the actual beginning fund balance in 2019-20 is about $17 million. And you can see where we are headed and projected at the end of 2023-24. We'd have about $80 million in total reserves, 59 million in the general fund, 21 million in the Purge reserve. In terms of the assumptions, most recent updates we had from ODE, most recent enrollment adjustments. Again, the state school fund at 3.3 doesn't include the SIA, high school success, or ESSER funds. And again, based on the best information we had when we put this together just recently. Here's the same thing, but kind of more of a graphical look at it, just this line chart saying, all right, where have we been? Here's 17, 18. You can see the red line is our expenditures, the blue line is our revenue. So for a couple of years, we spent more than we brought in. Then in 1920, the pandemic hit, and we spent quite a bit less than we brought in. Started to shrink that gap a little bit in 2020, 2021. Clearly start to shrink that gap in 2021, 2022. In fact, this year we budgeted that we would spend about $7 million more than we bring in. We have not done that purely based on staffing shortages and our ability to get folks in place and in the positions we have open, substitute shortages and the like. While we intended to spend more resources this year, we have not, again, because of those shortages. Based on the projections you saw on the previous page, we begin to the red line, the expenditure line goes above the blue line beginning in 22-23, and that continues on all the way out to 2024, 2025. Student investment account, again, this is a new source of revenue. You can see the original award in 2020, 2021 was $32.3 million. Unfortunately, that again was start of the pandemic. So what we actually received was 10.5 million. So 32.3 was the estimate. We got 10.5. Our actual award for the current year is almost 31 million. We're spending that now in the current year. And that SIA is expected to grow to 32.1 million for next year. So we're almost back to where the original award was a couple of years ago, beginning next year. Here's how we spend those dollars. You can see the original award and what those goals were. SIA Goal 1, increasing academic achievement, including reducing academic disparities for focal groups, addressing students' health and safety. And again, there's a spot here where you can, a link here to where you can see the plan in a little more detail. But on the far left is what we originally had put together and the board approved. Next to that was what we actually got and how we spent those funds. Next to that, our 21-22 actual award and how those funds are being spent. And then our current projection, and again, this will be shored up as we put the actual budget together, our 22-23 projection and how we'd spend those funds. So again, new source of revenue, didn't have this 3 years ago. Significant investment in Oregon schools starting back in 2020, 2021. ESSER, another new source of funds. We have what we consider ESSER 1, 2, and 3. It was basically 3 major awards at the federal level. ESSER 1, we fully spent that. That was about 10.1 million. We spent that in 2020, 2021. What did that do? It helped shore up some of that shortfall in the SIA, as well as took care of a lot of health and safety issues that we had dealing with coronavirus during that year. ESSER 2 is part of the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act, 20.7 million. And then finally, ESSER 3, that was part of the American Rescue Plan. That was a much larger appropriation, that's a 46.4 million. All of these are one-time funds and they need to be spent by September 30th, 2024. What were the considerations for spending plans? What do we use to create the original ESSER and what are we currently using? We used the staff surveys we did last year, back in January of 2021. We're using the information we've collected in January and February of this year to make adjustments to the ESSER plan. We also use the student investment account and our SAM, which is our staffing allocation methodology. We use those priorities to guide us as well. So within the SIA and within the staffing allocation methodology, there were things we would love to do that we couldn't afford. So as we look to those plans, we've been using some ESSER dollars to shore up some of those areas in SAM and get more resources to kids in schools. We also have operations and some HVAC requests in ESSER, and again, using the equity lens as we allocate these resources. Here's the budgeted strategies. And again, I won't read all these to you, but you can see, you know, over 70% of the dollars are spent on in the area of time and attention, relationships and mental health, and the HVAC, improving indoor air quality. So those are the major buckets we have. And again, when we're done with this, we'll get you a copy of the slides so you can take a look if you want to see some more detail. Here's ESSER salary versus non-salary. That's something the board has asked us to keep an eye on. You can see currently this number, last time the board saw this was a much larger number, and I'll show you why we're not spending quite as much as we thought we would when we initially presented on the next slide. But we're currently spending about $13.2 million in salary this year. Coincidentally, I quizzed Jessica on this quite a bit. We have another 13.2 million scheduled currently to spend on salary and benefits in year 2. And then in year 3, you see that drops down to 6.4 million. What we have not yet allocated is the pending allocations of about 10.7 million and 5 million. We're working on a plan now with 2 deputy superintendents and their staffs to come up with allocations for some of these pending dollar amounts because they actually were not spent during the current year. Here's the reason for those. If you look at this first section on either of these charts, you see the budget for 21-22. You can see the actual as of the end of January on both of these charts. And then you can see what we have planned in 22-23, and 23-24. So you can see we had planned for about 170 staff positions. We've currently funded about 124. Planning on 97 next year, 46 the year after that. Again, creating a glide path of staffing so that we don't see ourselves falling off a cliff out in 23-24. Non-salary investments, you can see what was budgeted in the current year was 8.5 million, about 800,000 in a summer learning grant match, 4.2 million on devices, software, books and materials, 1.4 million in COVID and PPE, 2.1 million in student services, charter schools and indirect, and what we spent of that currently, of that 8.5 million, about 2.5 million. I think we have a lot coming in terms of the materials and those kinds of things. I think they're on their way. And as we get those in prior to June 30, those expenditures will be reflected in there as well. So we budgeted in 22-23. You could See where a much higher number of HVAC projects come into play, the 8.4 million we have budgeted in year 2. And then the whole number kind of tails off in 2023, 2024. And Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. For the record, my name is Jessica Jones and I am the district's budget manager. And this 22-23 budget is my 13th budget with the district. I'm going to walk through some of the results from our listening and learning video. In the middle of January, Associate Superintendent Schofield released a budget listening and learning video. With this video, we included a short survey that received almost 2,000 responses. That's an increase from what we received last year. Included in here were about 300 responses from students, which was really great to see and a huge improvement over the single-digit number we saw from students last year. There was one open-ended question on this survey, and we received nearly 1,000 comments. For presentation purposes, we used February 18th as a cutoff date for the data that we're presenting, but the survey was open for another week until February 25th. I believe that was last Friday, 2 Fridays ago. And all of the comments that were submitted are presented on the budget page of the district's website. I think it's about 104 pages, but all of them are there. If you participated in last year's Budget 101 meeting, this slide might look a little familiar to you, as the priority rankings from the survey results were prioritized in the same order and almost the exact same percentages as they were last year. Class size was the #1 priority by almost half of our participants, followed by social emotional learning and mental health staffing and supports. And then staffing for academic intervention staff and supports, including credit recovery, and followed up by summer and before or after school academic programs. The survey responses that came in after the February 18th date that we used for this graph brought these percentages even closer to what we saw last year. With the nearly 1,000 comments that were submitted, the top 5 themes were also very similar to last year. 3 out of the 5 topics matched what we've seen before. The #1 topic submitted was class size, followed by social emotional learning and mental health. New to the list this year is staff wages and contract completion, which replaced COVID health and safety from last year. Additional staffing was included as #4 both last year and this year. And new to our top topics is special education supports. Next slide. So next, we're going to do a very quick budget document overview. Our document is close to 300 pages, which can be a little overwhelming to find the information that you're looking for. So I'm going to go through some of the key pages to get you going with an overall picture of our budget. The image here is our 2021-22 adopted budget. And so all of the examples I'm going to show are from that. We'll do this again when we come back together in May with the updated 22-23 proposed budget document. The budget that's shown here is available on our website, on the district's website on the budget page. Or if you'd like a bound copy and you don't have one, please let me know and I can get you one of those. Along those lines, I'm going to mention that everyone on the budget committee will receive a bound paper copy of our proposed budget document about a week before our next budget committee meeting. But I need some help in figuring out how many of the adopted that I need to order. So if you could please email me your preference for whether or not you want a paper or electronic copy of our adopted budget, that'd be really helpful. The 4 main sections of our budget document are the executive summary, the organizational section, financial section, and informational section. Our budget document follows a format that is recommended by the Association of School Business Officials International, ASBO, and follows Oregon budget law. The district has received the ASBO International Meritorious Budget Award for 10 years, and the Government Finance Officers Association or GFOAs, a Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for 9. Next slide, please. So the first section is our executive summary. This is liftable in a standalone document that gives the reader a very high level of the overall budget. We publish this both as part of the budget document and individually on our district's budget webpage. So if you just want an overview, you can look at that, or you can get into our full document. Included in this section are a narrative of the overall budget process, and major changes in the budget message, as well as financial data, enrollment information, salaries, benefits, and positions for all funds. Next. So this is what the superintendent's budget message will look like. It will most likely be on page 4 again. It is really the first thing that we kick off the budget document with. On these pages, the superintendent details the overarching factors that help drive the budget development, as well as the district goals and some of the challenges that the district is facing in developing the budget. Next, please. On page 10, you can see a summary of all funds for the last 5 years. This is all budgeted information. There's no actual information shown here, but it's really helpful to see the makeup of the district's funds and how they've changed over time. I know that Mike mentioned it a little bit towards the beginning when we're looking at the grant fund in particular growing. I know it's super tiny here. The very last line on my image here is the grant fund, where you can see it change from $37 million back in 17-18, where that was the first year of the high school success grant, to $180 million in 21-22 when we have SIA and ESSER funds included there. Next, please. Enrollment history and projections can be found on page 15. As you saw earlier in the presentation, the majority of the district's general fund funding comes from the state school fund, which is dependent on the number and demographics of the students that are enrolled. Here we show a little bit of actual information, so some history of what has actually happened, and then a few years of projections. If you're looking at this and noticing that the 21-22 number does not quite correspond to the enrollment graph we showed a few back, this is from our budget document from last year, and we didn't have actual 21-22 information at that point, and it did come in lower than our projection. Thank you. The organizational section is our second major section. This section is very narrative. It gives a really good description of the district as a whole. It talks about our structure, our school board, our administrative staff. It includes our strategic measures of student success, how the budget process works, and the financial reporting information that we have to do. And this is also where we include a summary of our multi-year strategic investments. I don't have any individual pages included in this section just because the nature of this section is very narrative, but there's a lot of good information in this section. Our third section is the big one. This is our financial section, and we show both a summary presentation and a detailed presentation of our financial information, both at all funds levels and individually. We have 13 funds, so it's quite a few pages. We include a variance analysis. We have budgeted positions, debt and capital projects information, and new in the 21-22 document, we've included an individual fund overview at the very beginning of each of our fund sections. And here we're describing some of the major revenue sources and the trends that we're seeing, as well as some of the expenditures here as well. Next, please. The only page that I really wanted to point out here is the variance analysis, so that you know what it looks like. When we come back for the proposed budget, we'll look at a few more pages in the financial section. This variance analysis shows budget to budget variances, as it's not budget to actual, and it's looking at the current year and the upcoming year budget. Since this is our 21-22 adopted budget on your screen. We're comparing 21, 22, and 2021. And the last section, our informational section, there's a lot of data around our schools and allocations, as well as strategic investment reports and surveys, and our staffing and allocation methodology is here as well. The first page that I'm going to point out here is the ratio teachers staffing by school. This document has morphed a little over the years and was originally put together to show what the local option levy meant for each of our schools. Now that we have classroom teachers in the student investment account, as well as the levy, showing the local option levy with the general fund only would not show an accurate picture of how our ratios are allocating teachers to schools. So we've changed it to include all ratio teachers. The teachers that are shown on this are allocated by the staffing ratios that can be found in the staffing allocation methodology that is also in this section. And then right after that page is personnel resource allocations. And here we get a little more detailed with our job titles within a specific employee group. And you can see actual information as well as 2 years of budgeted information. Next, please. School summary pages. There's a single page here for every school in the district. It includes a lot of different data, such as enrollment information, staffing and financial information. We have teacher experience, demographic information, testing scores. So there's a lot on each of these pages, and it's all on one single sheet. And so this one here is for a low Heber Park. So this kind of shows you what it would look like. And now we're moving on to the budget timeline. Some of the key dates that are coming up, Budget 101, that's tonight. We'll be back together with you in May on the 9th for the superintendent's proposal of the 22-23 budget. At that meeting, the superintendent will deliver the budget message, and you will elect budget committee officers, and we'll be hearing public testimony. That meeting will be followed up by a second budget committee meeting on Wednesday, May 18th. This meeting will include budget committee discussion, and it will have the approval of the budget and the tax levies. And finally, the school board will see the budget one more time at their June 21st meeting. There will be a budget hearing, and the school board will vote on the adoption of the budget. Okay, committee questions and comments. So I'm going to turn this back to you, Chair Collette, for facilitation.
Great. If anybody has questions or comments, you can raise your hand. I think it's under the reactions button, or if you're having trouble with that, just put your actual hand up and I'll be happy to call on you. And I see Lisa.
Oops. Oh, yeah. Thank you, Tom. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the question I had, there was a slide early on that showed, I would believe it was locally controlled revenue, and that is decreasing. So I just kind of wondered what that is and why the decrease.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. That's a good question. So locally controlled, the primary driver of that number for the general fund is the local option levy. That has not been decreasing. It's gone up a little every year. What you'll see inside of that occasionally tends to show an increase and then a decrease is our Apple lease. So we'll get proceeds from a Apple lease for new machines like we did this year. And we'll have that budgeted both on the revenue side and on the expenditure side for budget purposes. And then the next year they go away on both sides of the ledger. So it's a little misleading in that it goes down, but it's really this one-time lease payment that we have to account for and that we budget for from year to year. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but thank you. Yeah, I wondered if we were losing local option levy money or what that was. Okay.
No, local option levy continues to increase on a modest basis. What you're looking at is an accounting technicality of budgeting for lease proceeds. When we buy Apple like this last go around was for our teachers to get all new Apple laptops. And what we do is we do a lease in that situation. So we issue the lease, we have lease proceeds on the revenue side in that other section, and we have lease requirements or expenditures on the side to recognize the cost of the lease in the expenditure side. And we don't do that every year. We do that every 3-4 years.
Okay,
So
that makes
then the number drops in the ensuing year.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
You bet.
Other questions for budget? Oh, Heidi?
My question is specific to the state fund for summer school. Can you tell us more? So it was 150 million, but we don't know what we're receiving as a school district. Is that correct?
That's correct. 150 million is the total that'll be allocated for summer school. I think 50 million goes to organizations that are not the school district. There's about 100 million to school districts, and we're not, we haven't received our allocation here for Beaverton yet.
Okay, and that will obviously fall in, I mean, will that need to be spent then this summer?
Yes.
That's the plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And we'll see, hopefully it's got a little longer tail on it than it did last time. One of the issues we ran into with last summer's money is we didn't find out about it until May.
Right.
Remember? And then we're kind of scrambling to get programs set up, and we got those set up. And just as soon as things were ramped up, we had to ramp them right back down because spending needed to be done by the end of September. So it was we were running as fast as we could in pretty much every department last summer. So
okay,
this year we'll get a little more time.
Thank you.
I saw Karen's hand up.
Yeah, you explained it in like 3 different slides, but I wasn't quite sure still why or how this was happening. But you had the general fund revenue and expenditure slide with the red and blue lines crossing around 21, 23. And then our expenditures were going to go higher than our actual revenue. And then you showed it again, kind of in a different format on the state school fund history and projection by biennium one. And can you help me understand again why we're going to be spending more? Is that because the ESSERs are going down and we have, or
no, that's a good question, Director Prince. So it's not that it has to go down. What I use, just so you know, is we're funded at 9.3 billion in the current biennium, and we used, I think Jessica was 9.9 or 10 billion in the first year of the next biennium, which would be that 2023, 2024 year. If that happens, that's about a 7.5% increase. And if, again, over a 2-year period, so if you split that in half, because it's not 7.5 each year, it's half of that 7.5 each year. That doesn't keep up with what we spend. We spend a little over, at least by our budget estimates, 5.5% by the time we give people a step increase and a cost of living adjustment each year, as well as other non-salary items going up, especially in the inflationary environment we're in. I think we're using about a 3% inflator on non-salary. So when you add all that together, what we're currently projecting is that if the legislature doesn't do better than they've been doing, then we will have expenditures exceeding revenues. If the legislature does better starting in the 23-25 biennium and gets back to that trend of 10 to 13% increases, those deficits could go away, if that makes sense. So right now it's our estimation, and that's something we keep an eye on. We're just looking out there. We're not doing anything about it now. We don't have to make budget cuts or make budget changes. We're just keeping an eye on it to say, what would happen if? Does that help?
And then another question I had with the student investment account, we had goal 1 and goal 2. Are the metrics that we're using to see how we're doing on that in the SIA plan? That I see a link there on the slide.
I don't know
Is
if
that what the
they're
metrics are?
contained in that link, but I think that's the entire plan document. Jessica, is that correct? Okay.
I was thinking about just like the metrics that we're using as we're going to need to do some stair stepping on our way out of ESSER funds. And I was just thinking about what metrics we're going to use perhaps to figure out which pieces we might be able to keep and which pieces we may need to cut, or how we are, and it might not be an answer for now, but just wondering how we're going to engage our community and how we're going to figure out which pieces, how we're going to stair step our projects out of ESSER funds and into something else, or cutting.
Agreed. And we're having those discussions now, and we're talking about which items we can measure. And, admittedly, part of our concern is the ramp up is so quick, even on ESSER, and then the ramp down. How much data and conclusive data do we have? But we have picked some things out to measure. And you'll see some of that.
Thank you.
Becky?
Is it correct, Associate Deputy Schofield, that the Oregon legislature does not fund us at our current service level, and that is part of the issue that we have trying to keep up? Is that true?
That's absolutely correct. And that 3.3% biennial increase that I shared with you earlier tonight is part of the issue, right? Like, I think the legislature said, hey, school districts, you've got SIA, that's new, that's a new source for you. You have ESSER funds, that's great. But the short-sightedness of that is you got to watch that general fund budget. That's your operating budget. That's, it's it's the biggest slice of the pie for us. And if we don't keep that at a level that's sustainable, it's great. We have all these other funds out there that do these other things that are restricted, but our general fund budget's got to keep up, and it has not, at least in the last biennium.
Sunita?
I wanted to find out, the survey that was done. How do you use that in your general fund? How much is that used?
I use it.
Yeah.
It's really prioritization, Director Garg, in terms of seeing where the community is. We take this information and we chat with our Deputy Superintendent of Teaching and Learning, Jeannie Hansman, Deputy Superintendent Carl Mead. They'll get a look at this data so that as they put together a recommendation from each of their side of the house of the school district, they take that recommendation to the superintendent. Superintendent again makes those decisions about budget priorities. They're using that data and information to help inform how we want to spend those primarily the ESSER and SIA dollars, a little less on the general fund side.
Ugona?
Hi, Mike. My question is around SR funds. I'm confident that we're going to exhaust those funds by September 30, 2024. But what happens to those funds if we do not exhaust them?
Currently, if we don't exhaust them, we would turn them back. There has been just some casual conversation at the federal level about potentially extending those deadlines, but nothing formal yet. But there's a little bit of talk about that. But as it sits today, we would return those funds to the federal level, or probably more accurately, we just would never get them. So we'll keep an eye on it.
Jason?
I'd be interested in the fact that it sounds like, based on one of the earlier slides, you said, we're still negotiating, the district's still negotiating with the certified union as well as going into classified union negotiations. If there is any type of historical context within the budget, I think you mentioned earlier, one of the slides, that we spend about 88% of our budget on salary and benefits. Is there some sort of number or projection somewhere in there that can give us some guidance as to what that might look at throughout the spring and give us some ideas? Because I know that, and I'd also be wondering, I guess maybe part of a follow-up question would be, how do we compare with our neighbors in terms of that percentage of the budget being spent in that particular area?
Thank you, Jason. That's a good question. We're similar to our neighbors, depending on what level of, there are some districts that might contract out like student transportation or nutrition services, for example, and not have their own employees. For most folks that have their own employees, similar to us, where we're a full service, self-operating shop, that's in the ballpark of what I'd expect it to look like. In terms of bargaining, yeah, we're still bargaining. We're hoping that we'll get that wrapped up fairly soon. So we'll have not only people been waiting a long time for cost of living adjustment, but it also gives us some certainty as we move forward into future years.
Diane?
Does that help?
Diane?
Yeah, hi. I had two questions. I'm brand new on the budget committee this year. So the first question is, do you have, or where can I find what I would call an acronym dictionary? I was a banker and we used all these acronyms, and they're just terms that got used tonight that I don't know what it is. So where would I find that?
My apologies. Jessica, we must have one.
In the very back of the budget document, we have one. So if it's available on our budget web page, or if you would like a paper copy, I can get one of those for you as well.
I can get it.
There's a glossary and acronym definitions in the back.
Okay, and my oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say glossary, cross-reference, the whole thing.
Okay, thanks. My second question was, I'm an ex-banker, and so I'm used to seeing things in like spreadsheet formats where it goes year to year and it shows what percentage it is of the total, so you can just go across. Will we get anything like that? And kind of related to that, the variance part of it talked about comparing budget to budget, but like in my world, it's actuals to actuals. So those are kind of related questions.
So what you'll get at an official committee meeting is the big overview and short kind of presentation of like the numbers I shared tonight. Within the budget document, you'll get tons of detail. And Jessica, I don't know if you want to talk about that a little bit, but you slice and dice the budget a bunch of different ways within the budget document, so you can take a look at that. Budget to actual, in terms of what we do, there's not a lot of it because you're always a year behind. We do that ourselves as kind of that post-mortem of where did we end up? And you saw that we did the spring projection versus where we actually ended up. You'll see that every year from me. But item by item, not a lot of that, and definitely not in our budget document. Okay, but we do account for it, Diane, all year long with the school board. We give the school board a projection every month.
Okay, but on the year to year thing, like if we're looking at historically, that'll always be actuals, right? Except for the fine. Okay, thanks.
I might add to. And correct me if I'm wrong, Deputy Superintendent Schofield. I think in the CAFR, you'll find documents like what you're asking for too, where you get budget to actual and things like that. So it wouldn't be, it's an autopsy of the prior fiscal year. It's not the current fiscal year, but if you're looking for those trend lines, that's the document I've found in the past.
That's correct, Chair Collette.
Other questions from the board or from budget committee members? Great. Well, I think this is our last agenda item, Mike, or do you have a closing for us?
It is. I would just like to say thank you. As Chair Collette mentioned at the beginning, you're in an unpaid position and a bit of a thankless task, but we certainly appreciate your insight in helping to make sure we're doing the correct process and that you're at least giving us that overall glimpse at the budget and letting us know where we're on track and where we aren't. So thank you very much. We look forward to seeing you in May. And if you need anything before then, if you want a little extra budget time to walk through any sections of the budget, or if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask. This is our time to be at your service, both Jessica and I. So please let us know and reach out if you need anything.
And I'll just add before we conclude that I think everybody will be getting a copy of the slide deck that we saw tonight, so you can review it, in your own home and at your own pace. And I would always recommend, especially for our new budget committee members, reach out to Deputy Superintendent Schofield, get a meeting with him if you have any questions. He can help with the budget and some of the edu speak to coding that may go into understanding that budget as well. So thank you everybody for your time tonight, and look forward to seeing everybody soon for our next budget committee meeting. And with that, we'll adjourn our meeting.